The end of the Skywalker saga should have been unforgettable. Instead, it was awkward, hollow, and left fans debating the wrong questions. Did anyone really walk out of The Rise of Skywalker thinking Rey was the rightful heir to the saga? Or did most of us feel the story ended with the death of the only character who actually mattered? Kylo Ren was not perfect, but that was the point. He was conflicted, torn between light and dark, and burdened with the legacy of his family. He was the most human character in the sequels, and audiences connected to him even when they hated him. That is the mark of a story worth following. Rey, on the other hand, was rushed, inconsistent, and constantly rewritten. A nobody, then a chosen one, then a Palpatine, and finally a fake Skywalker. Her story was not earned, it was patched together. And when the credits rolled, her survival felt less like triumph, and more like obligation. Now imagine the alternate ending. Rey dies in sacrifice, finally giving her character the meaning it always lacked. Kylo lives, redeemed but haunted, carrying the Skywalker name into a future filled with struggle and redemption. That ending would have been powerful, bittersweet, and fitting for the saga. The irony is that the sequels had all the pieces. They had Adam Driver delivering the performance of a lifetime. They had the themes of legacy, failure, and redemption sitting right there. They just chose the shallow ending instead of the meaningful one. In this video, we are going to break down why Kylo Ren should have lived, why Rey's death would have given her arc the weight it needed, and how one wrong decision robbed Star Wars of the powerful ending it deserved. Let's start with the core issue. The story of Rey never truly earned the right to carry the Skywalker legacy. From the very beginning, her arc felt rushed, contrived, and constantly rewritten to fit whatever narrative Disney needed at the moment. In The Force Awakens, she was set up as a nobody, a scavenger with no name who suddenly discovered she was unnaturally gifted with the Force. Within minutes, she was piloting the Falcon better than Han, dueling with a lightsaber like she had trained for years, and using mind tricks she had never even heard of. That might have worked if it had been explained, but the sequels never gave us that explanation. By the time The Last Jedi rolled around, Rey was still undefined. Rian Johnson leaned into the idea that she was nobody special, which actually could have been compelling. A hero rising from obscurity without a famous bloodline, proving that anyone could be powerful. But even then, she never really struggled. She defeated Kylo in combat at the end of the first movie, learned lessons from Luke in record time, and consistently seemed to skip the painful parts of growth. Star Wars has always been about failure teaching characters who they are. Rey skipped all of that. Then came The Rise of Skywalker, where Rey's story was rewritten yet again. Suddenly she was a Palpatine, the granddaughter of the most evil man in the galaxy. That revelation should have redefined everything about her character. Instead, it became a shallow twist that was immediately undercut by the film, insisting she was really a Skywalker by choice. So instead of confronting what it meant to be tied to darkness, her story ended with her borrowing another family's last name. That felt less like a resolution and more like narrative theft. Meanwhile, Kylo Ren had the exact opposite journey. He was born with everything: the grandson of Vader, the nephew of Luke, and the son of Leia and Han. Yet he threw it away, not out of destiny, but out of personal weakness and the seductive pull of power. He was flawed, arrogant, and filled with self-hatred. And unlike Rey, his story actually followed a clear line. He lost battles, he questioned himself, he was humiliated, and he slowly evolved into something deeper. That is the foundation of a compelling arc. Kylo embodied the tension that defines Star Wars, the pull between light and dark, the choice between legacy and individuality, the struggle of someone who could be redeemed but may never deserve it. Audiences could relate to his insecurity, even while despising his actions. He was the closest thing the sequels had to a three-dimensional character. When Adam Driver gave his performance weight, it grounded the entire trilogy in something authentic. Think about his scenes with Han in The Force Awakens, or with Luke in The Last Jedi. Both moments balanced tragedy with inevitability. When he killed his father, it wasn't just shock value, it was the clear sign that this character would never escape the shadow of his choices. When he faced Luke, it was not just about revenge, It was about trying to prove himself to the galaxy and failing again. That is the stuff great storytelling thrives on. By the time the rise of Skywalker hit, Kylo was primed for redemption in a way Rey never was. His confrontation with Rey on the Death Star ruins, his vision of Han forgiving him, and his decision to throw away the Kylo persona showed growth the sequels had been building toward. His journey had an arc with a clear beginning, middle, and potential future. Rey's, by comparison, felt like three disconnected drafts taped together. Killing Kylo at that moment robbed the saga of its most powerful ending. He could have lived, redeemed but haunted, a Skywalker descendant tasked with rebuilding in the shadow of everything he destroyed. That story has weight, that story has tragedy, consequence, and hope all at once. Instead, the films killed him to make space for Rey, a character who had no personal stakes in the Skywalker name, but inherited it anyway. Kylo Ren should have been the one to survive, because his death cut short the most compelling arc in the sequels. Think about what survival would have meant for him as a character. A redeemed Ben Solo, living with the guilt of his past, would have given Star Wars its richest post-trilogy story. That is the kind of character who can anchor new material while still respecting what came before. Imagine Kylo travelling the galaxy after Palpatine's defeat, not as a hero, but as someone rebuilding piece by piece. Every encounter would be shaped by the fact that he once served the dark side. Some people would spit in his face, others would demand his help, and he himself would never be free of the memory of what he did. That complexity is what makes a character endure. Luke, Anakin, and even Vader thrived on that tension. Ben Solo surviving would have carried the saga forward with actual emotional stakes. Meanwhile, Rey's survival did the opposite. Her story ended with her burying Luke and Leia's lightsabers on Tatooine, adopting a name she did not earn, and smiling as if the galaxy's greatest conflicts had been solved. But what was her struggle really? She lost no one she loved because she never had those connections to begin with. She carried no legacy because hers was artificially invented. And she sacrificed nothing, since even her death was undone seconds later by Kylo giving her his life. That is not an arc, it is a shortcut. This also ties into the larger theme of legacy. Star Wars has always been about family, bloodlines, and the burden of heritage. From Anakin's fall to Luke's redemption, everything came back to how your choices shaped your family and how your family shaped you. Rey had no connection to that beyond a last-minute Palpatine reveal. Kylo was literally the heir to every major figure in the saga. By killing him, the sequels cut the chain of legacy that bound the story together. Another point is that Kylo's survival could have reframed the Jedi Order in a more interesting way. Imagine Ben Solo being the one to rebuild the Jedi, haunted by his time as Kylo Ren. That would have forced the Order to confront its flaws, since its leader would embody both light and dark. Compare that to Rey, who was essentially a perfect student who never failed. Her rebuilding of the Jedi would be shallow compared to the depth Ben could have brought. This also would have solved one of Disney's biggest problems, the lack of compelling leads for future stories. Finn was sidelined, Poe was underdeveloped, and Rey never connected in the way Luke or Anakin did. Kylo could have carried the franchise because he was flawed, fascinating, and tied directly to the saga's past. Adam Driver's performance alone proved he could anchor more films or shows. And it is not just fans saying this. Even critics who were positive on the sequels often singled out Adam Driver as the standout. He gave nuance to a character that was written inconsistently. If he could make Kylo Ren work under those conditions, imagine what he could have done with a properly planned redemption arc. Meanwhile, Rey was often criticised as being overpowered and underwritten. Her survival only cemented those criticisms. By trying to make her the face of the franchise, Disney ignored the fact that audiences were far more invested in the conflicted, unpredictable Kylo Ren. Killing him removed the one piece of the sequels that truly worked. The irony is that Kylo's survival would not have erased Rey's importance. Her sacrifice could have been the final act of her story, cementing her as the Palpatine who chose the light. That would have been powerful. But instead the writers clung to the idea that she had to live, even if it meant stripping both characters of meaningful closure. Now let's imagine the alternate ending where Kylo Ren lives and Rey dies, and why it would have elevated the entire saga. First, Rey's death would not have been meaningless. If she had sacrificed herself to defeat Palpatine permanently, it would have finally tied her arc together. A Palpatine who rejected darkness and laid down her life for the galaxy would have been remembered with honour. That's an ending with emotional payoff. But leaving Kylo alive changes everything. The galaxy would be forced to reckon with him, the last Skywalker, redeemed yet forever stained by his crimes. That tension could have fueled decades of storytelling. He could have struggled to earn the trust of allies, fought old enemies who never believed his redemption, and rebuilt not as a symbol of perfection, but as a flawed survivor. That is more human, more real, and more in line with the mythic quality of Star Wars. His survival also allows the saga to close on a bittersweet note. Instead of the shallow optimism of Rey smiling at twin suns, we could have had Kylo alone on Tatooine, haunted by ghosts but determined to keep going. That kind of ending lingers. It makes audiences debate, reflect, and carry the story forward in their minds. The original trilogy ended with victory, but also questions. The prequels ended with tragedy, but also hope. The sequels ended with a shrug. Kylo living would have fixed that. It also would have tied perfectly into the larger theme of generational mistakes. The Skywalker family began with Anakin's fall, carried into Luke's struggle, and should have ended with Ben finding balance. Killing him cut that cycle short. By letting him live, the saga could have shown that while the past cannot be erased, it can be redeemed. That would have been the true conclusion to the Skywalker story. Another powerful element is how it would reframe the Jedi. Kylo rebuilding the Order would mean the Jedi could not repeat the mistakes of the past. His leadership would be messy, filled with contradictions, but grounded in experience with both light and dark. That is far more interesting than Rey teaching lessons she never truly learned. It also opens up possibilities for Finn's story. If Ben survived, Finn could have become the first student of the new Jedi path, blending his perspective as a former stormtrooper with Ben's as a former Sith. That would have created a dynamic duo who actually earned their roles. Instead, Finn was left in limbo, and Rey became the lone hero with no real foundation. From a cultural perspective, Kylo's survival would also have resonated more. Audiences respond to redemption, to flawed characters trying to be better. That is why figures like Zuko in Avatar or Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones became fan favourites. Rey was positioned as flawless from the start, leaving little room for growth. Ben Solo clawing his way back to the light had universal appeal. The Reylo dynamic would have also been reframed. Instead of a rushed romance, their bond could have ended with sacrifice and survival. Rey gives her life to save him, and he carries that memory as both burden and inspiration. That would have honoured their connection without turning it into an awkwardly tacked-on kiss. Ultimately, the alternate ending is not just about swapping who lives and who dies. It is about giving the story meaning. Rey's death would have made her arc finally resonate. Kylo's survival would have honoured the Skywalker legacy, and the saga as a whole would have closed with emotional power instead of narrative emptiness. The sequels ended with the wrong person living. And because of that choice, the Skywalker saga did not conclude. It fizzled. Kylo Ren should have lived, Rey should have died. And Star Wars would have been far stronger for it.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.